Hi, I'm Roy Madigan. I'm a small animal veterinarian in Texas, and today I'm going to talk to you guys more about what Chagas disease is, especially in our companion animals and dogs and cats. Chagas disease is a parasite that's caused by a microscopic protozoal organism called Trypanosoma cruzi. So, Chagas disease is not a virus, it's not a bacteria, it's not a worm. It's actually a microscopic protozoal organism, and it lives inside the cells of mammals. It's spread by a kissing bug vector, which is a giant mosquito like thing that flies around, it crawls around, but the important thing is that it takes blood meals from mammals, humans included. And we have a plethora of kissing bugs in the United States, especially in the southern regions. So, pretty much south of Oregon on the west coast, all the way over to south of Connecticut on the east coast. So, if you just draw a line of latitude all the way over from the east coast to the west coast, anything south of there, we're going to be dealing with these vectors, which are kissing bugs. Now, Chagas disease is considered a vector borne disease, which means that it has to have a vector for it to spread in nature. And so that vector can be a variety of things, but when we're talking about Chagas disease, we're talking about the kissing bug. So, other vector borne diseases that you might be familiar with are heartworm disease. We might be considering things like tick diseases, and of course, the most common one of those is Lyme disease. And so these vector borne diseases are very important because in nature, they persist and they stay in nature because of wildlife. So, for instance, with Chagas disease, things like armadillos in Texas are state animal. Very, very, very infected. About 90% of armadillos in Texas carry Chagas disease. So, that's a very big, what we call reservoir for Chagas disease. We also have deer, squirrel, possum, raccoon, fox, pig, any of these naturally occurring wildlife animals will harbor this parasite in nature, independent of things like dogs and cats and also humans. So it's what we call a sylvatic life cycle. So in nature, we have this transmission between these wildlife organisms and the kissing bug vector as it's taking its blood meals. So just like we were talking about in wildlife, we also have a transmission cycle in domestic animals. And so for today's purposes, we're going to be really focusing on our pet dogs and cats that we come into contact every day with. So obviously, they have to go outside at some point. And when they go outside, they get exposed to these kissing bugs. And then that's how that transmission cycle can go from a sylvatic life cycle in nature and start to transition over to what we call a peri-domestic cycle, which involves our dogs and cats. Now, we come into the equation when we have these as pets. So, our dogs and cats that are getting exposed outside of these kissing bugs now come inside the house, and guess what? They're bringing in that parasite to us and exposing us to. And that's where we start to get into a domestic cycle, which involves humans. So there's all these interchanges of transmission cycles that are coming together to make the perfect pathway for our pets to get infected and for us to be exposed as well. So kissing bugs, like I said earlier, rely on blood meals. So they literally follow carbon dioxide emissions. They are the perfect natural assassin. And they follow CO2 that any mammal, including reptiles and amphibians, also expel. And they focus in on that. They take a blood meal. And during that process, while they're feeding, they defecate. You can't make this stuff up. Inside of the feces of the kissing bug is where the parasite resides. And so that feces will actually get into the bite wound where they just took a blood meal from and transmit that parasite. It'll get into the bloodstream from that bite wound, and then it has access to every tissue in the body, including the heart, the brain, the gut, the eyeball, kidneys, liver, spleen, you name it, it's got access. And so that's the classic transmission cycle. Once it gets to those tissues, the parasite replicates, makes babies, and then goes back into the bloodstream. Kissing bug comes in, takes another blood meal, sucks up more babies, and then goes on to transmit that cycle to some other mammal later on. So that's the classic life cycle. The most common life cycle that we see, or transmission cycle that we see, in dogs and cats is actually the oral transmission cycle. So just like the name implies, we have a kissing bug vector, right? And the dog or cat ingests that kissing bug, or it ingests its feces. You guys are dog lovers, you guys are cat lovers. You know that they'll eat anything smaller than them that's small and moving, especially if that bug has some blood in there. So you have a nice chewy center, tastes very, very good, and it's self-rewarding. So once they eat one bug, they taste that blood, and then they're going to always go after those bugs and hunt those down. The problem is that whenever a dog or a cat ingests a kissing bug, that parasite gets released in very, very high numbers. In fact, it's about 6 to 7 times the amount of parasite from a fecal contamination. And they ingest all those parasites all at once. It hits the gut, and it just overwhelms the immune system, which allows it easy access to go from the gut into the bloodstream, and then again have access to all those tissues that we talked about through the classic transmission cycle. Oral transmission is associated with higher mortality rates, which means dogs and cats automatically are higher exposed and higher risk of mortality, which is why we see a lot of sudden death in dogs because of this disease compared to humans. Other transmission cycle pathways include vertical transmission, which is transmission from mom to babies. Okay, that happens in humans. It's very well worked out. It's about 5% transmission rate. We also see this in our litters of puppies. Personally, I've seen entire litters decimated and die within days of being born because of Chagas disease. On the flip side, we've had infected mothers give birth to very healthy puppies without Chagas disease. So it's not a guarantee that they're going to transmit it, but the percentages are very, very high in mammals to transmit vertically from mom to baby. The other transmission routes are a little bit less frequent. Blood transfusion certainly does happen in veterinary medicine. We don't transfuse as often as they do in human medicine, and so we see that much, much less likely, especially if blood banks are a little bit further north of that line we were talking about for kissing bugs. You don't have that problem. But a key issue with blood transfusions and blood banks is that they are not routinely checking for Chagas disease before they take their donor. And so that's a very, very important concern to us. On the human side, organ transplant, in addition to blood transfusion, is a major, major route of transmission for this disease. One of the last methods of transmission is through what we call carrion ingestion. So ingestion of dead and dying things. Okay, so for like that Labrador that comes up, your favorite lab comes up and he's carrying a giant armadillo in his mouth or some dead creature from a week ago, they can certainly get it that way as well. And then again, through the oral ingestion pathway, and then we have the disease everywhere. So I just want you guys to be able to understand the transmission dynamics of Chagas disease, how it's spread. In the next video, we're going to be talking about prevalence of Chagas disease. How much Chagas do we have in the United States right now? Do I need to be concerned where I live? Am I going to be adopting a dog from a southern region that has been exposed to Chagas disease? These are things you're going to want to hear about, and we're going to discuss that in the next video.